when you're feeling alright. Everybody will be dancing tonight.
Good evening. Welcome to Books and Books in Coral Gables. Thank you all for coming down tonight. Quick message for our internet audience watching at home. If at any point during the presentation you would like to purchase a copy of Foreign Gods, Inc., just call the number on your screen. We will have the author sign it for you, and we will ship it to you wherever you are in the United States for free. For our audience members watching overseas, it might cost a little more to ship that to you. Also, later during the question and answer period, if you have a question for Okey and Ndibe, just call the number on your screen and someone here at the store will get it to him during the Q&A. This evening, Books and Books is very pleased to present Okey Ndibe and his new novel, Foreign Gods, Inc. Ndibe teaches African and African diaspora literatures at Brown University. He earned MFA and PhD degrees from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst and has taught at Connecticut College, Bard College, Trinity College, and the University of Lagos as a Fulbright Scholar. He is also the author of the previous novel, Arrows of Rain. In this brilliant new work of fiction, Ndibe gives us a meditation on the dreams, promises, and frustrations of the immigrant life in America, the nature and impact of religious conflicts, an examination of the ways in which modern culture creates or heightens infatuation with the exotic, and an exploration of the shifting nature of memory. In a starred review, Publishers Weekly wrote, "Neither fable nor melodrama, nor what's crudely referred to as world literature. The novel traces the story of a painstakingly crafted protagonist and his community caught up in the inescapable allure of success defined in Western terms." Here to tell us more about it, please give a very warm welcome to Okey Ndibe.
Good evening. We're going to start all over. So, good evening.
Good evening.
That's much better. Well, I come from a culture where you don't get to a room and start speaking to an audience without offering salutation. And if you offered salutation and didn't get a response, that would be a polite way of saying to you, take a hike. So you don't want me to take a hike. That's good. It is my special pleasure to be here at this podcast event, joined by all of you as well as people who are watching from around the world. Miami is actually a city that my family and I enjoy visiting, so we've been here several times, but this is the first visit to Books and Books, which as Victor gave me a tour on my arrival about an hour and a half ago, I found that this is one of the most extraordinary bookstores that I've been in this country, or indeed anywhere in the world. So you must be proud of the work that you're doing. So today we're here to talk about my novel, Foreign Gods, Inc. But before we get into that, I'd like to tell one or two stories as a way of warming us up, right? And also as a way of introducing myself. I have a practice with my students of having each student tell a story in class as, by way of introduction. And I always start by introducing myself with a story. And so today I'm going to tell you a story of how I came to this country, the means of transportation. Who knows how I came to this country? Or who wants to take a wild, accent is on wild guess? By ship? That's very close. By cargo ship? That's even closer. I want somebody to jazz it up a bit. Do some, make a wild guess. All right. I came on the back of a crocodile. Yep. I was that desperate. Yep. You don't believe me, do you? Do you believe me? Well, there's a story, so that's where we start. So shortly after I came to this country, I became friends with a graduate student at a university that we're not going to name because the story does not reflect well on the quality of education that he'd received. So one day, this friend of mine said to me, "Okay, I see a lot of Africans in this country, and I wonder how you guys are able to come here when there are no airports in Africa." So I thought that this guy was trying out material for comedy. So I decided to respond in kind. I said to him, "We ride on the back of crocodiles across that Atlantic." He shaped his face in horror and he said to me, "Don't they eat you?" And I said, "Well, if you speak an African language, it makes crocodiles docile." I said, "So they will hug you and kiss you even if you wanted." So that's what we ride across the Atlantic to America. Well, later that night, he called me in a rather earnest voice and he said, "Okay." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I told the crocodile story to my roommates and they don't believe it. So I'd like them to see you so they will hear the story from the horse's mouth." So I told him that I didn't know the crocodile that much. I mean, the horse that much. That the crocodile was the animal I was on good terms with, but that the crocodile was too busy ferrying other Africans across the Atlantic to come meet his roommates and tell our story. And so this struck me as I thought about it, and as I shared the story with other Africans in Amherst, where I lived at the time. And it turned out that this was not an uncommon perception of Africa, that Africa was a charmed kingdom of animals, where the human population was incidental, peripheral to the drama of that continent. And so one relative actually told me that he'd been asked whether it was true that Africans lived in trees. And if you are an African at all, you develop a sense of humor about this thing. So he said, "Yes, that's where we live." And the follow-up question then was, "How do you get up there?" And he told the person who was asking, "It's simple. You take the elevator." Yet another friend was asked, "What do you Africans do when an elephant comes calling?" And he said, "Well, you have very little choice if an elephant visits you. What you do is you pull out a chair and you say, 'Mr. Elephant, make yourself at home.'" Anyway, so these are some of the encounters, some of the images that one encountered when I came to this country. And I'm actually writing several personal essays. It's not quite a memoir, but personal essays of my experiences in America called "Going Dutch and Other American Misadventures," where I tell some of these stories. And by the way, there are also Nigerian misconceptions. I'm originally from Nigeria. There are Nigerian misconceptions about America. So the last story that I'm going to tell you has to do with one of them. It had to do with what an uncle of mine said to me before I came to America. And he said to me, "Okay, when you get to America, whatever you do, make sure you don't make eye contact when you talk to people." Because he said, every American carries a gun, and if you look them in the face, they might think you're being provocative and they will shoot you. And so I made a promise not to look Americans in the face. Well, my uncle had never been to America, so you wonder how he got that impression. Well, many years ago in Nigeria, it used to be the case that once in a long while, a movie will be shown in an open field at night. These movies were usually westerns. And they were very old affairs where the picture was very grainy and there was a gap between the movement of the lips and the sound of the voice. And so very few of us knew what the actors were saying. But one thing we noticed was that at some point in that exchange, they would stare each other down, usually in a bar, and that became the signal for them to pull guns from both sides of the hip and start shooting. And so my uncle took away the impression that the biggest offense you can give to an American was to look the American in the face, to stare the person down. So he said, don't do it. And so I came here not looking at anybody in the face. Even on the day, on my the 10th day after I arrived in this country, I was arrested for bank robbery. Somebody had robbed the bank, and the police decided that I fit the description. And when the officer stopped me and was questioning me, I made a point of not looking him in the face. Because I said, if I look him in the face, then he's going to shoot straight away. And of course, because I wasn't making eye contact, he instead formed the impression that indeed I was guilty and I was hiding something. So, this is just one example of the ways in which different cultures develop grand and grandiose impressions of other cultures. And part of the subject of this novel is the ways in which people from different parts of the world want to have a desire, have a fascination, sometimes even an obsession with consuming ideas and products and so on from cultures from around the world. And so there's a gallery in New York City called Foreign Gods, Inc., where the wealthy of the world, of America as well as Europe and Asia, come to collect gods and sacred objects pushed from different cultures in what some people might call primitive societies. When my protagonist, who's been to school in this country, has been to, in fact, a very sound liberal arts college, but he's unable to get a job. He has a degree in economics, and his dream was to have a job, a corporate job, possibly on Wall Street. But because he has, first of all, he has to face the problem of the green card. You know, he doesn't have a green card. And finally, when he settles that problem, he finds that his accent stands in the way. And so he's a cab driver, has been a cab driver in several cities in America. And to be a cab driver is a good and honorable and honest way of making a living, unless it is particularly wounding to the ego of the person who is a cab driver, as happens with my protagonist. And so he decides to return to his hometown in Nigeria and to steal the statue of what used to be the god of war from his community to sell it to this gallery, Foreign Gods, Inc. in New York City. And when he returns to Nigeria, he finds that the same way that the wealthy of America like to pick up the exotica of quote-unquote primitive societies, that when he gets home, there is a fascination amongst his people with American ideas, including watching basketball, which when I lived in Nigeria, nobody cared for basketball. What we cared for was football, real football, not the rough handball that Americans call football, see. But he goes back and, everybody is watching basketball because, they've been told that these tall Americans get paid bags of money, which is, in my language, in my Igbo language, the way you translate millions is to say bags. So people get paid bags of money for throwing a ball through this hole. Then there is this fascination with American cuisine. So some of the young people who are watching this game say, if we ever go to America, we're going to start playing this game and we'll get paid bags of money. Once we get paid bags of money, we're going to stop eating the food that we eat here in Nigeria, we're going to start eating hamburgers and, pizzas, and we're going to drink sodas, So the whole idea, the whole fascination with America and the way Americans eat is what this guy finds. So that sort of way, that kind of way in which we desire the culture that is not ours immediately is part of the subject, just part of the subject of this novel. So what I propose to do is to read 2 quick sections. I've been to several readings where an author will open his or her book and read 20 to 30 pages straight. And for me, that is torture. And when I sit in the audience, or even if I watch it on television, the thing that goes through my head is, when is this going to end? As an adult, I'll much rather pick up the book and read it myself. So I want the author, at best, to give me a taste. And so that's what I do. I treat my audience as I would want to be treated. I don't want anybody reading 20 pages to me. So what I do is to read 2 short sections that will give you a taste of the book. And the first section that I'm going to read is early on in the novel, where Ike is desperate for a green card and makes an arrangement for somebody to be his green card bride. The woman he pays takes his money and runs, and along with other her enablers in this scheme. And then the second section that I'll read will be where Ike steps into the shrine of the deity. And by the way, the deity's chief priest is his uncle. So there is a particularly filial dimension to what he does, to this act of treachery, instilling the deity. But we'll get to that later. This is the point at which I drink some hot water. Very tasty. Ike's quest for a green card that started in 1997, a few months before his graduation. He'd applied for a job at 2 banks, but when he phoned one bank's human resources department, a female employee phoned back and left a terse message on his voicemail. "Sir," the woman said, "Bay Bank does not interview aliens unless they produce evidence of authorization to work in the U.S." Later that day, Ike went to visit Harrison Amadu, a Nigerian acquaintance who lived in Springfield, Massachusetts. Harrison was a cab driver, but he also knew his way around immigration problems faced by Africans. Through him, Ike contacted a Puerto Rican broker named Ricardo Ortiz, who in turn produced a 22-year-old woman named Yesenia Diaz to be Ike's green card bride. The broker demanded a fee of $5,000 before Yesenia would pose as Ike's bride. With Harrison's help, Ike negotiated the fee down to $3,500, and then he borrowed $1,500 from Harrison to make the down payment. Ike and Yesenia Diaz were to meet at the office of the Justice of the Peace to exchange marital vows. They held a rehearsal, Yesenia's face bearing a sneer through it all. Came the appointed date, and Yesenia was nowhere in sight. Ricardo showed up alone with the news that Yesenia's grandmother had taken ill in Puerto Rico, and the would-be bride had traveled to be at the matriarch's bedside. "She coming back soon," Ricardo assured, "and then the wedding, it gonna happen." For the next 3 months, there was no Jasenia. Yet, at the end of each month, Ricardo appeared at Ike's door and demanded the due installment of $200. Ike, who combined his studies with a menial job, cleaning several movie theaters, restaurants, and offices at night, chafed at the unfair arrangement. Why did he have to scrape from his meager earnings to make monthly payments for a fugitive bride, he wondered. His grudge notwithstanding, he had little or no negotiating room. Then came the 4th month when, fell by the flu, he couldn't walk for close to 2 weeks. He had no cash to make the installment. He dialed Harrison Amadu, hoping to be bailed out with a small loan. "You should start driving a cab," Harrison said in a tone drained of sympathy. "The job brings steady income." The next day, Ike presented himself to Harrison, who introduced him to the office manager of Triple E Taxi Company. With his boosted income, Ike paid off the bride fee in 3 months. To his dismay, Jasenia remained missing. Even so, Ricardo showed up once or twice each week asking for various sums. "It's a loan," he'll say. "Soon, I pay you back." One day, Ike refused any longer to be duped. That night, just past midnight, he was jerked awake by the ring of his phone. He was in the middle of a terrible dream. "My cousin, he say you playing stubborn," said a woman's voice. Confused and agitated, Ike slurred, "You have the wrong number." "Oh yeah?" said the female voice in a fighting tone. "You gonna play the wrong number game now?" "Who is this?" Ike asked, sitting up in bed, perplexed. "It's me, Jesse. Ricardo cousin, Jasenia." Recognition hit, accompanied by a flurry of confused, stuttering statements. "I have been. We need. Ricardo said you. I've been looking for you. We need to meet. We have to file a marriage petition." "Oh yeah? I'm not marrying you. My cousin said you're proving difficult." He kept asking to borrow money, and he never paid back," Ike explained. "And he was supposed to bring you." "Bring me? I ain't bringing unless you pay Ricardo." Ike sulked for a few weeks. Then he gathered himself up and relocated to Philadelphia, where he continued to work as a cab driver. From there, he moved to Atlanta and then to Baltimore. Wherever he moved, he brought along that stubborn dream of a green card. The card was the open sesame to a corporate job befitting his education. Often, when he met a woman, he calibrated his interest in her to the likelihood that she would consent to marry him. Until he met Benita, he had had a streak of failures. So that's a little taste. Nowhere near 20 pages, right? Yeah. So the second section, which I like to read, is the moment when Ike, and by the way, for somebody to decide to steal a sacred object, a deity, it's a particularly difficult decision for anybody to make, I would hope. And for this character, there is a lot of internal turmoil. There's a lot of wrestling with himself before he ultimately makes up his mind. And it's a seesaw, you know. Some days he decides, I'm not up to this, but some days he thinks he's going to go through with it. And part of the part of what tips him in favor of going ahead to steal the deity is that he figures that this deity used to be a god of war, is the god of war for his community, and no wars are now being fought. His community has not been in any war for a long time. They part of the consequences of modernity is that the law courts have become the arena where disputes are settled. So so you need lawyers more than you need warriors, and this deity didn't have legal matters as part of his department. So it's not a juggernaut in legal matters. He led warriors in war and made them invincible and made them ultimately triumphant over the community's enemies. But this was, it's been maybe 80 years since the community has been in a war. And so Ike decides that in a lot of ways there's no more job for this deity to do. So the deity might as well travel to the United States and perhaps go to some place and instigate or run wars or whatever. And so so this section has to do, in fact, a much shorter section has to do, and then we'll take questions, with the moment when he sneaks into the shrine, which abuts his uncle's home. So the shrine is attached to his uncle's home, and his uncle is the chief priest of the deity, and he sneaks in at night to steal it. So this is the moment when I take another sip of water, if you don't mind. So it happens at night. Ike swept the dark air and touched the deity's face. His fingers felt something viscous and thick, and he knew it was sacrificial blood. He groped along the statue's wooden outline all the way to his torso. In the dark, his hands could feel the sturdiness of the chiseled wood. The statue rested on a squat base that enabled the deity, in the eye of even casual beholders, to exude an air of grandeur appropriate to a god whose department was war. Ike placed one hand around the statue's neck and the other on its rump, and then lifted. Finding it much heavier than he had expected, he put it down. How could something so spare and lanky prove so dense and earthbound? In the dark, he wondered whether the deity had tensed itself, made its weight leaden, bent on deadening the abductor's will. He knew that Ngene, which is the name of the deity, was a mobile deity. As a youngster, he had on numerous occasions seen Oswahu, his uncle, hoist it upright on his shoulder and trek to villages far and near, wherever an oath needed to be taken, and back. Yet his uncle was not only much older, he was also a man of meager musculature. Years of overwhelming kai had also made the old man seem frailer than many men his age. Ike flexed, but when he lifted the statue a second time, its weight seemed lighter, mysteriously much lighter. He placed it on his shoulder, the same way he'd seen his uncle carry it, and turned to leave the shrine. He didn't raise his legs high enough. His sneakers scraped against the earthen floor and screeched. His heart jumped. From a nearby room, Oswahu, his uncle, coughed twice, muttered something dreamily, and then resumed his snoring. Ike gingerly stepped out of the shrine. A soft breeze cooled the beads of sweat on his face and neck. He drew several deep breaths and prayed the night to keep his secret. The draughts of air were mixed with the deity's disgusting smell. He kicked out his legs to shake off an incipient cramp. his head, crammed moments before with a jumble of emotions, became strangely uncluttered. The pressure of the statue's weight against his hand and shoulder kept him rooted in the present. He wondered how long he'd been in the shrine, impaled by fear. It seemed to him like hours. It seemed to him like hours. Thank you very much. So we're gonna.
All right. For those of you that came in late, if you have a question, let me raise your hand and let me get to you with the microphone so that the internet audience at home will be able to hear you. Very well. Here you go.
Are any of Ike's experiences as an immigrant, be it experiences or feelings, your own? Did you go through those experiences? Is there anything personal in your book?
Oh, good. Yeah, that's a common refrain, actually. People are intrigued, and somebody has asked me, bluntly, what gods have you stolen? But I know that wasn't your question. No, actually, Ike, my first novel has moments that intersect with my biography more, This one is mostly a work of the imagination. A cousin of mine told me that a deity had gone missing. The statue of a deity had gone missing near my town, and I was intrigued. And that's what sort of the germ that ultimately triggered this story. So I would say no. I mean, the only thing is that, like Ike, I'm an immigrant. And like Ike, I've had moments where, because, by the way, his accent, which proves problematic for him in the workplace. When he was in college, at Amherst College, so many women said, "Oh, we love your accent," and so he was like exotic, and so they were acquiring him, and he was willing to be acquired. And so I had those moments where people, when I came to this country, people would say to me, "We like your accent." And, so but no, I came to this country at the invitation of Chinua Achebe, the Nigerian novelist, to set up an international magazine. So I came with a job, unlike Ike, who came as a student and finished and couldn't find a job. Yeah.
I have a question. Okay, you started your talk with describing great cultural differences between Nigeria and America. And I'm curious, with both Foreign Gods, Inc. and your previous novel, what kind of differences in responses or reactions have you noticed between American readers and Nigerian readers specifically, or perhaps African readers as a whole, compared to North American readers?
Good. A very good question. And I'm going to talk about the reaction to the novel of even publishers. Originally, the original manuscript of this novel started in a cab with Ike on his last day as a cab driver. And so we get a kind of inkling of the sort of experience that he goes through every day. People who walk into his cab and he greets them and they ignore him. And he feels affronted, because he feels, look, I could be in your job, and you come in and I say good afternoon, and they ignore him, and it's as if he's become invisible to them. So that's one. And then when he says his name, Ike, a lot of people call him Ike. Now, I don't know if you notice the difference. Ike means strength, power. Ike, on the other hand, means the rump, your backside. And so the same spelling, but in Igbo, depending on how you pronounce it. So he tries to get people to pronounce it properly. And they just keep saying Ike, calling him the buttocks. And then on one occasion, an attorney who's riding in his cab says, "Oh, you know, how do you spell it?" He says, "I-K-E." The man says, "Oh, that's Ike. Just change your name to Ike. You know, it's a venerable American name. You know, my name is Okey, for example, and Americans go, you have to get it right, okay?" But anyway, so the point that I was making was that the cab scene who wanted to do this novel loved it and said, "Oh, powerfully to the experience of Africans who cut of immigrants from Asia, from elsewhere in the world, but their accent keeps them away, and they are stuck as cab drivers, you know." And recently, I met a Lebanese taxi driver in New York. Just 2 weeks ago, he drove me to the airport on my way to London. And we got talking, and he has a first degree in mathematics, and he's an attorney. But he says, "I interviewed for jobs here, and, you know, people will say to me, your accent, you know, people won't understand you, so they don't give him a job." So my Nigerian, who could have been my Nigerian publisher, wanted that longer scene in the cab because it spoke to the Nigerian experience. My American publisher said, cut. We don't care for this. Let's send him to Nigeria quickly. We don't want him to be in, you know, so they didn't care for this experience and they felt, oh, it gets in the way. Readers want him in Nigeria, still in the gut and coming back quickly. America, as a cab driver, was grist to who he was and spoke to us. So, and so that's sort of what I've seen. You know, some reviewers have said, "Oh, you know, the American section is not as strong as the Nigerian section," you know, because. But then there have been some perceptive reviewers, you know, at least the reviewers that I prefer, who have seen the power in the two sections, both my depiction of America as well as my depiction of Nigeria.
So thank you for this. I'm excited because it's a book I can use in my American Immigrant Lit class.
Amen.
So I have a question about the first half of the text, which is, how come he didn't seek a wife amongst the Nigerian community?
Okay, good. That's actually a very fraught question. When a lot of immigrants come here, they want to, at least those I know, of course, I don't speak for immigrants really, but the few that I know, they want to have their American life on their terms. And so a lot of them will prefer to almost have an arranged marriage where they will get a green card and then choose the person they want to be with. And so if there is a Nigerian woman who is here, who is either a citizen or has a green card and who can then, through marriage, give you a green card, she may not find you attractive if you are looking for a green card because, you know, she has questions about you. You know, she doesn't know. Without a green card, you don't have a job. So she may not know about your prospects. So a lot of them prefer a man who has settled the green card question, has gone to school, and has a job. Then we can talk, you see. And so it's easier often for a lot of people to just pay somebody and get into this arranged marriage, yeah, which then has an expiration date corresponding to the day, you know, shortly after you get your green card. Then you can negotiate the expiration. But some people actually get into a green card marriage and then find they love the person they're investing with, and then the marriage lasts. Yeah.
Let me get to her with the microphone. Did you have a particular model for Ike, or is he a total composite character?
Ike
as
is
I
composite.
walk back,
Ike is composite, yeah.
All right, here we go.
How can we get more African literature in the mainstream educational system? I started reading African lit probably about 4 years ago. Of course, I read Chinua Achebe in college. But how can we get more authors like you into the mainstream curriculum? I think it's important, especially for African American children, to read stories like this.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, this is the great commission. This is the great, most important question of curriculum development. And in a lot of ways, I would say that the answer ultimately is going to be a gradual, evolutionary process. That people become larger in their imagination, and that as people realize that it is in the interests, people act out of self-interest, that it's in the interests of their own children, of themselves, to be properly educated about all the parts of the world that constitute our globe. With that growing awareness, I think, will come a broadening of outlook and a broadening of the curriculum. If people think that Africa is marginal or that African American writing is marginal, then that writing is ghettoized, So it's like it's in the corner. So if you want exotica, visit it. But African writers and Asian writers and writers from different parts of the world are doing exciting work. And those who don't know it, in a lot of ways, impoverish themselves if you're not part of that great ferment, that great gift, harvest of creativity that that comes from different parts of the world. So I would say that people like you insisting that this is important, and people like all of you coming to these events and saying that this literature holds up. I mean, my novel, for example, has been named by Amazon.com as one of the best books of January, by different other organizations as one of the best books of January, by New York Post as the book of the week, and so on and so forth. So, and they're not saying this because, they're not doing this because they feel this is a quota for Africa, so let's get it. They're saying it based on the strength of the book. But there are some people who don't get it, so they'll hear all of these things. If I were an American author, they will rush out and get it. Right? But they hear it said about your work, they say, it has an ethnic sounding name, when all of us are ethnic at the end of the day. And they say, and they pass. But people with imagination, and I take it that all of us here are men and women of extraordinary imagination, ultimately will change the world and change the way that the writing, the kind of writing that I do and that so many other people do, is received. And by the way, on a positive note, I must say that there is a movement in that direction already. So there is a greater inclusion of this kind of writing in the curriculum, but we need a lot more.
So I guess I have two questions. One is, what part of Nigeria are you from?
Yes.
And then the other is, the main protagonist, is that the same part of Nigeria that he goes to get the statue?
Yes. I'm from Igbo, IGBO, which is in the southeastern part of Nigeria. And those of you who have a long sense of Nigerian history will recognize that area as the section that wanted to secede from 1967 to 1970 from Nigeria, precipitating a war that cost perhaps 2 million lives. So I'm Igbo, and the protagonist of my novel, yes, is also Igbo. And thank you for those two questions. Yes. I
was just wondering, following up on the question about the American curriculum, if you've been finding that your books are being used in Nigeria or elsewhere in Africa as part of the African curriculum, helping perhaps to dispel the foreign gods Inc. notion of the United States and about the ease with which getting the bags of money will be if one immigrates to the United States.
Yes. Well, actually, I do know that some usually universities in Nigeria study my book, but it's studied even more in Eastern Africa, in Kenya, and in Southern Africa, particularly in South Africa. How do I explain Nigeria? So it isn't, Nigeria is a very strange country. Nigeria is a very strange country. It's as if Nigerians want your work to be authenticated outside of the country, and then they will get involved. So there's a lot of interest in this work because it's received very strong reviews from the New York Times, LA Times, and so on. And so every day I open my email, Nigerians are saying to me, how can we get this book? But if this same book had been published originally by a Nigerian publisher, a lot of Nigerians would ignore it, even if it received all the positive press in Nigeria. So there's this fascination with external validation. But academics are a different matter. And in some parts of Africa, my work is being read. And it's important. By the way, the internet has done, what I think is working to erase some of those blindnesses that we have about the other, whilst reinforcing some, by the way. Yeah, but whilst creating some. But I think that Nigerians used to think that if you came to America, you arrived at the airport and there were dollars, strewn all over the floor, and you can collect as much as you wanted. So first time I returned to Nigeria, a relative of mine asked me for $3,000. And she said, I don't want to ask you for serious money because I know you start making excuses. So just give me $3,000. And I had gone home with a total, after my flight ticket, with a total of $800 to spend. My parents and my siblings who were in school and so on. And this woman felt, there's money in America, give me $3,000. So I think that they're beginning to get it now. Yeah.
All right, for our final question, this gentleman back here.
I had a question about the sense of identity. Is it with the different tribes, Ogoni, Igbo, Yoruba, the national lines being drawn by the colonizers, is in the sense of an emigration and a return to the home country, which identity is stronger or takes precedence? The tribe, you go to the Nigerian, or the Africa? And then the other thing I wanted to ask is, who were your models when you were growing, and what did you read?
Good. Very good question. Let me take the second question because first, I was lucky that my parents had, my mother was a school teacher, and so she brought in a lot of books. My parents brought in a lot of books into the house, anything from Victorian literature to Shakespeare. And so I read those, some of those, even when I was in elementary school, and definitely when I got to high school, I became, in some senses, an obsessed reader. And so there was a phase, I've had phases. There was a phase when I read Victorian literature, and then there was a Shakespearean phase which corresponded with when I was in high school. Then when I was in college, Faulkner became huge for us, American lit. Then I discovered Raphael Ellison and Richard Wright, But then through it all, African literature, African writers, Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, Sembene Usman, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who is an extraordinary writer. These were all very important formative influences for me and for many people of my generation. I'm drawn to Greek, Sophocles, for example. The Drama of Antigone is one of my favorite books. Gilgamesh, the old Sumerian epic, is another book that I really, really treasure. And my first novel, by the way, is informed by Antigone. So to go back to the first question you asked, typically, you find that, and if you read the internet has popularized all our prejudices and so on. You find that typically many Nigerians, I don't have the evidence to say most, but I'll say many Nigerians find their ethnic identity to be the most significant and meaningful. Okay? Which is understandable, because Nigeria is a creation by fiat of British colonial power. The close to 500 different cultures and ethnic groups gathered together in this behemoth called Nigeria had absolutely no say in their constitution into one political community by the British. The British just did this. They were able to convince their European cousins at the Berlin Conference to concede to them this new acquisition, this territory in West Africa, as as their possession. And so the British did very little because they were not in the project of creating a nation. The British were in the project of creating a huge market, both for their produce goods as well as as a source of raw materials. Okay, when the British left, because there was no national consciousness, nor were there seeds for the flowering of national consciousness, most if you read Achebe, for example, if you read No Longer at Ease or A Man of the People, you find a competition for what people call the national cake. So every ethnic group wanted to get an inordinate portion of the national cake, which is to get the resources of the country without creating the resources of Nigeria. And so for a lot of people, a lot of Nigerians, Nigeria becomes significant only when they leave Nigeria. And you show up in London or in New York and they say, where are you from? And suddenly you realize, I can't say my hometown, I can't say my ethnicity, it's Nigeria that I must announce. So my hope is that, and Nigeria has fought a terrible war, a very costly war in which 2 to 3 million people perished. And yet we haven't got that issue down. The issue of national identity is still very troubling, compounded by all these issues of corruption and so on. So my hope is that we create and achieve Nigeria, or if we can't, if it proves too costly, that we have an arrangement for going our separate ways. Now, there are a small percentage of people who are Pan-Africanist and who see themselves simply as African. That's a tiny minority. Yeah? Thank you.
All right. Yes, thanks. Quick reminder for folks watching at home on the internet, if you call the number on your screen, you can still purchase a copy of Foreign Gods, Inc. Okay, we'll sign that for you, and we'll ship it to wherever you are in the United States for free. Also, in reference to these live-streamed events, you could go to the Books and Books website, and any event that has been live-streamed will be archived there. So if you don't happen to watch it live, click on the link on the homepage of the website, and it'll take you to the live stream website, and every author that we've presented live stream will be archived for you to watch whenever you wish. For those of you here in the store with us tonight, we have the book for sale at the counter as well as on the west side counter, where I have set up his signing table for you to get your book signed. And that was such a fascinating talk. Please, let's give him another hand. Thanks very much.